Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Afternoon Tune. I'm your host, Josh, and I got a special guest with me here today. That's where you're supposed to come in there.
Oh, I thought you went in and out for a second. I was like, damn, everything got all quiet on my end.
No, I was like, I was tossing the ball
I
to
was like,
you.
damn, not even an introduction to my name, nothing.
Well, I
Okay,
was
all right,
just,
I'll go on there raw.
you know what I mean. I was just gonna say like, hey, special guest, and I thought you were gonna come in, and yeah, my
What's
bad.
up, y'all? It's your boy Ganja Guru from the Chat Tech, also from Luminati Podcast, and a bunch of other projects that are possibly in development hell at this point.
Yeah, guys from the Chat Attack, things like that. They also stream on Twitch. When do you guys stream on Twitch?
We stream almost every fucking day. Most of the time, we tend not to stream on Thursdays, Fridays, but sometimes you catch Diaz having his moment, and he plays Warfare with y'all, or plays some of that good old Jackbox TV.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because you guys, you do the warm up for DT, right?
We do the warm for DT, and then we also do our own stuff with the after hours. So that's when we hang out with all the people that watch the Tag because also watch DT. We come hang out, watch movies. Sometimes preview movies that are going to be later reviewed in the show later on. So it's just a mixture of fan made as well as our own little creation going on as well.
Okay, awesome. And Ganja, the reason I had him on today, it's almost been what, almost 2 years since I've had you on. Because the last time I had you on was when we did the Fred Hampton movie.
Yeah, shoot, that was right 2 years ago.
Yeah, I believe because yeah, Black Judas and the Black Messiah that came out what 2020 or was that?
Man, that seems like almost like two coups and a couple of revolutions ago.
Yeah. So I think it's almost been about two. Oh no, it was in 2021. So a year that movie came. So it's
About a
like
year, yeah.
yeah, so a year since it's been you on. You on for that review. It was you and I believe Jenna was also on that review as well. So yeah, a lot has happened since then. A lot has happened. But I brought him back here today because he is a comedian, and we're doing a review of the George Carlin documentary "American Dream," which premiered on HBO Max. So George Carlin, if you don't know, legendary comedian, iconic comedian, for a lot of people considered one of the goats of comedy. Highly regarded as being one of the greatest comedians of all time. And the documentary goes through his life. It goes through interviewing his family members, like his daughter, his brother. Also interviews other big comedians like Chris Rock, like Patton Oswalt, Bill Burr. Make appearances throughout it. And this documentary, American's Dream, is directed by Judd Apatow, as well as another guy. Let me go find his name real quick. So I've been wanting to check it out. George Carlin, like I said, big fan of his work and his material. I haven't seen a special of his in a while. Actually, me watching this documentary made me want to go back and watch old George Carlin specials. What is your familiarity with George Carlin?
George Carlin is actually one of the first comedians that I remember seeing when I was coming up. So one of the things that was weird in my household was comedians kind of got a pass when it comes to entertainment, even though they were saying some of the raunchiest shit that you can possibly imagine, especially for like a kid around toddler, almost coming up to like a teenager age to be hearing. Like he wasn't the first comedian I ever heard. The first comedian I ever heard was some woman comedian that I don't even remember her name. But I do remember her bit was just talking about giving birth recently and how it affected her pussy lips and how it feels like if she just put like bells on it, she could just cause the church choir to go out and song. And being like 6 and 7 years old, hearing such wild shit come out of someone's mouth, it makes you interested for a little bit. Like, hey, why are they allowed to say such horrible things? Meanwhile, if I even get close to the word shit, I get popped in my mouth.
Mm.
So it was one of my first interests with comedy and just being raunchy and be able to express yourself in a certain type of ways that might be considered lewd in just a general public sense or even around your more uptight family members. But George Carlin was about around the third or fourth comedian that I came in contact with, and it was mostly because my mom was watching one of his specials, and she actually sat me down to show me it because we were listening to comedians on their CDs and stuff,
Mm.
and she was finding more age appropriate comedians for me to watch. And I guess somehow George Carlin just slipped the radar for her. And I remember watching one special, and it was the one where he was talking about the Iraq War, and his infamous bit about religious people killing each other. So I got to see a lot of that stuff early, and got the privilege to see it come out live when it did because of my mom and also my dad being huge fans of comedy.
Nice. So is that what inspired you to get into comedy? And when's the last time you have done stand up? Because I know you.
Ooh, it's been a while since I've done stand up. To be honest with you, now I do a lot of my comedy through the podcast and just working out different bits and different stories through the podcast, and it's any times that I can interact with the audience on that level. But when it comes to actual stand up on the stage, it's been about a good 4 or 5 years, and the reason I retired was some family issues. I actually lost a lot of the will to continue when it comes to pursuing that career, and with recently with new types of things coming on in my life and new goals that I want to achieve, I've been wanting to get back on stage. But honestly, that's what really stopped me from pursuing the career. I was getting it hard too. I was going almost every other week over at the local Laugh Factory in Fort Lauderdale back when it was at the Seminole Hard Rock Casino. And now they got rid of that club. That club's now long gone. So I don't know where people are going now. They're probably going further down to Miami. But I'm definitely looking to get back into the comedy scene, especially when you see all the jokes and comedians that are coming up nowadays.
Okay, well, that's also another reason I had you on. Also to not only talk about the documentary, but just talk about the state of comedy in general, and we'll get into that discussion and get into you know
Oh, this movie is constantly just kind of dancing around a little bit, but I want you to go into the more description.
Okay, so yeah, we'll get into that. So, like I said, with this, we're discussing George Carlin's documentary, "The American Dream." Like I said, directed by Judd Apatow. Mike Bifiglio is the other guy who's directing this documentary. So it's a two-part documentary. I saw it on HBO Max. It's basically telling the life and history of George Carlin, about how he started, about how he rose, his kind of his details about how much impact that this guy had all the way up until his later age. He passed away at the age of 71. So they use a bunch of archival footage, obviously, to show him and show his work and everything like that. And the first part, a lot of it details his early life, how he wanted to kind of get into comedy, saying that he was, wanted to get into acting specifically, and pursue that, and then wanted to become a disc jockey, and then it says like that was kind of maybe a good way to get into it and get into that realm, of maybe getting into acting and pursue that. And so that was kind of very interesting because besides for his comedy, I don't really know much about his life or his early, life and early beginning. So that was very much interesting to hear that, how, people who had a very early impact on him, about his political views, like when he was a disc jockey, that eventually, led to, his comedy in the future. And did you gain any new insight watching this documentary, or did you already know a lot of this information already, from George Carlin?
Well, one of the things that kind of it really hurt me when it came to watching this documentary is I'm a big fan of history, and it comes to a lot of history with even the stuff that I enjoy that's considered more general entertainment rather than just specific political history, world history, or any type of stuff that will be considered academic. I look into counterculture stuff, and one of the biggest ones I like studying is the history of comedy, and George Carlin is one of those ones that if you are a big fan of comedy, you definitely have come across multiple of different documentaries and interviews where you see the difference in his development from being kind of like the salesman pitch comedy that you see in the 50s and the early 60s, right before the counterculture really starts kicking up, and you see the change in the actual way that mainstream media portrays itself with the more dominant counterculture coming into frame into the late 70s and early 80s. So seeing him make that transition, I think, is something that is interesting because you have a little bit of a generational war with George Carlin that you don't really see in a lot of comedians, and I think that kind of gets brushed over the side a lot for a lot of people, where it's more of a mentality like, well, a fuck you dad kind of mentality than where in the documentary and other documentaries it kind of shows his transition to, well, I appreciate more what the kids are up to, and I'm more in agreement with their political philosophies than these people that I'm catered to here in Las Vegas, because they do show him ending up changing his ways and being being basically 180 in his whole type of setup and his way of presenting his comedy ideas in Las Vegas and being kicked out and being fired because of it. And that's really one of those moments in which he sacrifices a possibility of comfort and relative ease to pursue more of his general arts. And you don't really see that in a lot of the way that people describe that type of comedy mentality. It's more of like, oh, I wanted to stick it to the man, I wanted to be a rebel. Whereas for George Carlin, it was really him just siding with something that he truly believed all along that was coming out of the younger generation, and him picking a side rather than try to play both or be in the middle ground in order to maintain his own sense of privilege. And he even mentions that when one exchange with Chris Rock, which, by the way, I have to criticize Chris Rock here because he makes comedy sound like the Illuminati in some fucking weird way, where he talks about us being like a secret vanguard of like the political lens of society, which, by the way, that's all bullshit. Uh, it's mostly just this elitism that you see come out of comedy now, with it being accepted as a mainstream. It happens with a lot of stuff, and for a lot of people that don't know, and one of the main reasons that I was on the Fran Hampton review is I'm actually a communist. I'm a Marxist-Leninist, so I see things through a Marxist perspective. And one of the things that you see developing in comedy is the development of this elitist class of comedians that see themselves as the inheritors of these different type of philosophers and legends of Richard Pryor, George Carlin, and now see themselves as this either vanguard or elite club of funny dudes that can tell you what really is going on in this country. When back in the day, even George Carlin says, "No, we're just comedians making jokes. This You're making it bigger and grander what it is." And to see Chris Rock pretty much get that idea presented and then get stomped on by actual George Carlin's response to it shows that comedians are kind of up their own ass with this a lot. When they switch to the comedians, they're kind of up their own ass. Whereas George Carlin was someone who was just expressing himself. He had no grander ideology of what a comedian should be, or what the standard of comedy, or how to present comedy, or how to be a rebel within comedy. He was just George Carlin. And I think that's what a lot of people forget when they get wrapped up in the legend of these different comedian legends like Richard Pryor and George Carlin, as well as Bill Cosby and a few others.
Interesting point, because you make it so people get wrapped up in kind of the legend of George Carlin. So, like you said, it tracks kind of his history all the way from the '50s to the '60s, the '70s, and '80s, and how comedy you see kind of his ways kind of change and evolve over that course of time, and you kind of see that. And with the speaking about the legend of George Carlin, with this documentary, I think it speaks to this because you do see a lot of people, I guess a figure in history who's now been long dead. Their words and their actions are kind of going to get manipulated by other forces, and now, it's like this person would have spoke for us, and he, would have been this, or this person would have been this, or this person would have been that. Speaking on modern day situations and where they would have sided, and getting into kind of one of the bigger, broader discussions I also want to have with this documentary is that with George Carlin, I guess you could say he's also been a person who's used as a figurehead, maybe for the right. Would you say that would that be the right terminology to use?
I think honestly, like every great philosopher, great philosophers, great people in history, celebrities. This again, I'm gonna lean towards my leftist way of describing the world. That's because where I come from. But you always have these people that are rebels in their time. That always push back the grain. That eventually get co-opted by the mainstream culture. You see it with a bunch of people. You see it with Malcolm X. You see it with Martin Luther King. Hell, we even saw it with the Fred Hampton movie, where they really try to make us feel sympathetic with the snitch character, and try to present his humanity over the fact that he was portraying a movement that was trying to bring good to the community and trying to change the way people think of how their economic systems should be handled. So you see that in all brighter things. So there's always a war for these different type of cultural legends. It's just with George Carlin, he's he's just him. Like he's not really like a philosopher in the sense that you would see a traditional Plato, Nietzsche, Marx, Gramsci, or any of these type of people that were trying to put a philosophy in life. He was just someone that was giving his own express opinion on philosophies of what he sees and how he can make it funny. And you have a lot of people, especially in the right, that want to adopt that mentality because they think it gives them a justification to be as brutal, horrid, rude, and misogynistic and as racist as possible they could be on stage in the pursuit of just being an edgy comic. But even in his own in words, he has a infamous interview with Larry King in which he's talking about, I think it was either Sam Kinison or Andrew Dice Clay, where he talks about either one of them doing a bit about Jewish people. And he talks about, yeah, in comedy you can joke about anyone. There's really no sacred cows, but words are, and this is something he really understands. As he mentions, he is a wordsmith. He understands there's power in words and there's influence in words, and you could direct people in different ways with words. You could direct them to laugh, you could direct them to anger, you could direct them to frustration. And one of the things he talks about is, hey, you're making jokes about these people now. Well, the people that tend to laugh really hard at these jokes don't really like your people either. And that is something, the mentality you have to take in when you do these type of outlandish humors that might single out certain individual cultures or different communities. And I don't see that kind of responsibility in modern comedians today, especially with the whole Dave Chappelle, and honestly, I think the whole comedian war on transgender people that's kind of brought up in the last 2-3 months because of the whole Dave Chappelle incident.
Mm, okay. Yeah, because throughout this documentary, you get pieces of his special, and you see his different views on different things. And I think I forgot who the person was, but they had a good quote about him in this, and this is like, was he a nihilist, or was he a guy that was optimistic but playing a character that was nihilistic? You know what I mean, for the comedy. While he was on stage, and while you see when he's on stage, you get a sense of his different politics, like different you get his stance on abortion, very much relevant what's going on right now today with the Roe v. Wade thing situation going on right now. You get his kind of different views on war. You get his different views on using foul language in here, and you kind of get a different sense of that throughout this kind of documentary and seeing it, and seeing what kind of guy he was, and like you said, he was just mainly just him. It was just him who presented this to the world, and his ideas and his beliefs. Were there seeing these kind of different specials and seeing them, was this kind of do you think that, I guess, with this documentary, do you think that it will give people a more clear idea of who Carlin was, if they have any kind of misunderstanding of him as a person?
I think if you actually watch it for the Carlin bits, whenever they show Carlin's interview by his family members, his daughter, bits of him being interviewed in the past, archival footage, especially his brother when he interjects and gives explanations of stories from his point of view and then from his recollection. I think those are moments where they actually shine through and shows George Carlin's life. But whenever you interject and you add a different comedians to it, then it starts to take on a different narrative. Where at certain points they do mention cancel culture with Jon Stewart, and nowhere in his he mentions political correctness, but he's talking about political correctness in the more hardcore authoritarian term, and they immediately includes that to make, oh, any type of person that criticizes my bits or wants to shut down my bits is authoritarian. Meanwhile, their bit probably has a lot of racial humor. It's got a bunch of stereotype shits. Got a bunch of stuff that people don't want to hear, and with their modern sensibilities, the time now that people just want to allow people to be themselves and not have to worry about hearing a slur word when they go to a comedy club on a Saturday night. And there is that kind of political drive when you get involved with the other comedians, I feel. But when you just watch George Carlin's bits, the interviews with his family, I feel it's like a straight on narrative of his actual life and experiences. I really think this is one of the best documentaries to come out about George Carlin in the longest time, and will be put up there with the top ones if you actually want to understand the person.
Mm, nice. Just like best documentaries in general that you've seen, or
Yeah, honestly, yes.
okay.
Mostly
Um,
because without the few interjections of the few comedians would clearly have their own narrative, it really is the George Carlin story.
Okay, so you didn't really like much of the comedians coming in, because you have Bill Burr, you got Stephen Colbert, you got Chris Rock, you got Patton Oswalt, Kamau Bell, you got Jerry Seinfeld, Hassan Minaj, you got Paul Reiser, Jon Stewart, Stephen Wright, and Tony Orlando, who come in.
Besides Bill Burr, I give him a pass, and it's not because I like Bill Burr. I do like Bill Burr, but he talks about him from a comedic fan point of view, and his story about being in the audience, basically going to go see this old comedian bomb and being blown away by his new persona. I think it's a perfect addition. But at a certain point, Stephen Colbert, Jon Stewart, Chris Rock, they all start selling their comedy philosopher fucking bullshit snakes oil salesman gig at a certain point in their interviews, and that really took me out the film.
Okay. Yeah, and you see kind of, Carlin, talk about different bits, like I said, and, talk about, liberals, talk about Republicans, talk about, the different parties, and, the.
He even talks shit about the radical left of the '60s, where he talks about they abandoned me, the other half ran into the mountains, and the other half went and got MIBs and degrees.
Yeah, very much mentions that as well, and and how he's kind of going through all this, and also seeing kind of comedians at some point around in the 80s when his star was kind of fading, when he was a rising one in the 70s, it was kind of fading in the 80s. And you're seeing all these now, he was seeing all these other comedians kind of come up who were inspired by his material, like you mentioned, Sam Kinison, who they also show in this documentary through archival footage, like at one of like a comedy tour special he was doing, and kind of seeing that of these kind of other different how that was kind of changing, of course, and how he had to more adapt with the times. Do you? So you said before that you don't think the documentary really leaned into that much of just as much of that kind of changing of his ways, or was that what you kind of mentioning before there? The documentary didn't lean into much.
Feel like the documentary leaned very well into it. One of the things that I feel like it does kind of lean into, which is one of my disagreements, is a little bit of the narrative of comedy being the new philosophy in America, and them being the new truth tellers and new seekers. And I fight against that a lot, mostly because of my own political background. I believe philosophy is to be the engine that guides you to change the world, not for you just to poke fun out of it and try to keep on theorizing it, because it helps nobody to do that type of stuff. So to see comedians kind of take on that same kind of bourgeois attitude, I completely disagree with, and I don't think I will ever agree with, because of my own political background. But other than that, I think whenever it focuses on George Carlin and actually stays on George Carlin and doesn't allow the comedians to interject their personal anecdotes outside of like appreciating his comedy set or appreciating his way of being an artist, it really is a top documentary for me, and I think it really does explain a lot of his personal life, especially a lot of his history with drug use. Because before uh, this documentary, honestly, you would see a lot of documentaries come out about George Carlin that would just hover around his drug use, talk about the cocaine, maybe the drinking, and just interject his bits about it to kind of explain, yeah, he had a problem with it. But this is the first time that they've gone in deep with it, with the domestic abuse, the violence in the house, the emotional abuse, the trauma that they all experienced with each other before they were able to get their lives together. So I think this one is a very more human aspect to George Carlin, where the other ones really want to heavily focus on the legend and the sort of quote unquote comedic philosopher of George Carlin.
Yeah, because the documentary tells the story of how he took LSD, and when he took LSD, he went into the house and punched all the photos with himself in them, and then so hard that he was bleeding, and then he cried, and his daughter had said that was the first time she ever saw her dad cry, and they had to like physically like stay on top of him until he fell asleep. Uh, you know,
And then they talk about his wife going down the spiral after she loses a lot of her what she feels her utility and her role in the relationship, as well as her in his career, and she spirals into drug use and alcoholism that eventually takes her life later on in the documentary that we see. So it really humanizes George Carlin, and it's not just the legend of the comedy or the quick life of being this some nobody that rises up to huge fame as Lenny Bruce's hero. It really shows the true story of George Carlin.
Yeah, and discussing how he was kind of prioritizing being on the road and constantly just going, and she was all left at home by herself with the child, and he would be gone for weeks and weeks at a time. The comic life, you know what I mean, or a lot of life if you're sometimes if you're an artist like a musician or kind of things like that. You're gone for long stretches of time, and the person's there just kind of waiting at home for you to come home, and how stressful that can be. And I like that insight into his personal life. Again, not knowing much about his personal life, that was very interesting to kind of get into there. Are there any kind of strong negatives that you had about it that like other than the
Honestly,
comedians?
this is a solid film. Besides the what we've already talked about in length, with the whole comedian aspect of it, this really is a solid documentary about George Carlin. There was a lot of love put to this. There was a lot of effort to show him as a roundabout person rather than just the legendary figure we see from a lot of comedy past. Matter of fact, I wouldn't mind this becoming a series from Judge Apatow, seeing how seriously he handled this and see what he could do for the Richard Pryor story. Because with all the people now that know Richard Pryor, they're getting older now. One of the things that we haven't really had in a while is a really good documentary about Richard Pryor that's gone out the way, similar to what we see with this George Carlin one, to get all the interviews, all the archive footage, to really follow his life of growing and expanding as an artist as well as his person. That we see him become the chaotic Richard Pryor in the '70s to more of the comedic legend and the calm almost teacher-like figure that he became in his later years before he passed on. So I would like to see him kind of do that, maybe see this go on to be a series and see how he handled the Richard Pryor story.
Yeah, it's funny. Paul Mooney. I mean, he passed away a year ago, a couple years ago, and he was
Yeah,
one.
about a couple of years ago now, and a lot of them, Pops passed away
Yeah,
from
yeah,
from Friday. So a lot of these guys now are
yeah.
getting to the age now that we should start getting their archival footage and their interviews down, so we can share these stories and share these legends for the next generation that want to take part in these crafts and careers.
Yeah, John Witherspoon. Yeah, he passed away.
Yeah.
That would be a great idea. I'd be interested in that. Hearing about that with Richard Pryor and other legendary comedians. With this, so to kind of get into a little bit of a broader discussion, for discussing this documentary, and like you said, you mentioned like how you didn't like some of the comedians in this, and kind of maybe interjecting their own kind of agenda or ideology and kind of this in their way, with kind of Carlin's work. Do you think? What do you think of the state of comedy? I'll ask that first. What do you think of the state of comedy right now?
Uh, uh, Woo! All right, so comedy is not a monolith. That's one thing that I want to talk about. Comedy is all around the world. You got comedians in India, you got comedians in Asia, you got comedians in Europe. You have a rise in African tradition now of different types of comedy based around local culture traditions, as well as importing the European and American style of comedy. So it's not just one place of comedy. This is really just an American example of comedy. It is joining the culture war like everything else in this country. And with the rise of the whole issue with Dave Chappelle, the transgender almost seems like to be the punchline for every comedian that wants to be edgy now or feel like they're taking solidarity with that type of comedy. It's really starting to adopt the mainstream political climate that you see in this country already, and it's really going to boil down to which side you choose. And it's honestly similar to what this decision Carlin had to make when he was coming up in the '60s between his parents' generation, the ones a little bit older than him, that he was still performing for, and the younger kids that had new, more radical ideas that were trying to express these ideas, who were essentially at war with their parents in a certain way. You do see that with the rise of the new sexual revolution that's going on with our generation and their ability to express their LGBTness, LGBTQ plus uh, identities a lot easier, or at least feel more confident in coming out and living those different lifestyles they feel like they should be allowed to express, and they should be. And you're seeing a backlash from that. And I think the whole transgender issue is just the modern day version of the homosexual scare that we saw in the early 2000s, when they would make the same accusations about gay people wanting to groom children when they became teachers. So, and the comedy is now leaning into that, especially when you have the whole podcast gig, because during George Carlin's time and a lot of these other comedians, yes, some comedians had radio shows, but they were always kind of held back by the FCC and their local radio broadcast monopoly. Whereas now, thanks to podcasting, you have people like Joe Rogan that can actually lead a political revolution without actually intending to, but just bringing on a certain type of guests and platforms, certain type of people. And comedy does take a role in that. And I think that is something that a lot of modern comedians don't understand within the American context, that we are part of the culture war. To quote an old left wing song, which side are you on? That's pretty much where it comes to. And I think that a lot of people can't accept that. And they want to lean on these figures like George Carlin and their different time of comedies as a golden era, without accepting the reality and the material conditions they are in now and what they're performing in. I mean, you can't tell me Steven Crowder isn't a continuation of George Carlin.
Just in the sense of what people pretend that he's like, or like the.
Even what the right wing pretend he's like, or people when they say, "Oh, his offensive humor," George Carlin would have defended that. Like
Right.
you can't put words in that man's mouth, especially when we've had actual interviews that say the opposite.
Right. And I kind of also want to kind of get your opinion in the class of comedians now. The like you said, is it? You think now, like with most comedians, it's very much they think that fighting this kind of culture war stuff, that they're kind of going to be looked at years and years later as they were the ones that fought back against the system. That they look at like this whole people on Twitter cancel culture stuff is like them fighting against the system.
I think there's a mix of that, but honestly, my real opinion, and Chris Rock kind of lets the cat out of the bag a little bit when he talks about this vanguard elitist club of comedian truth tellers is they comedy has come so far now and has advanced so far as an entertainment industry that they have entered themselves into the bourgeois Hollywood elite. They now have their own little clubs of different people that help each other out, that get cheaper movie deals, that they all get their different friend networks. And one of the biggest risk of cancel culture, or even, God forbid, a change in trend in comedy that might make them obsolete, is it's gonna fuck with their bag. It's class. It always really, if you look behind stuff, it's all class, even in the comedy world. And they're worried about these new kids with their new ideas of everyone's equal is gonna make it that their more raunchy bits don't sell, and now they're gonna affect their money, and they're not gonna be able to leave a bigger bank accounts for their grandkids. That's all it really comes down to. Yeah, they'll hide behind the idea of sanctity of art, but when you get them, like in the interview with Chris Rock, get them behind closed doors where they're feeling comfortable about something, they let the cat out the bag. They feel like they are now a privileged class of people that deserve their right in the spotlight. When, again, in the past, we see George Carlin get arrested and Lenny Bruce get arrested.
Yeah.
So it shows that the history of this art is to be a counterculture. It's not to become this part of the elitist class, but they're fighting for that, and you see that clash between the two different sides.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it brings up how George Carlin and comedians were, really, really. I mean, you want to talk about cancel culture? I mean, really attacked for their words because I mean they were literally put in jail for it. And I had to spend a couple nights there, like someone like Lenny Bruce and like George Carlin. They mentioned that story there in the documentary. But it's funny, when these comedians talk about cancel culture and sometimes or people just in general talk about cancel culture and how much they've been silenced and they get huge Netflix deals for $100 million plus to say how much they're being silenced. That's always pretty funny.
You want to see a cancel culture? Start talking union with your manager in front of you at your workshop. See how quick your freedom of speech gets cut off then.
So stuff like that. So it is kind of funny there. And you bring a point like any asshole like me or anyone else can just grab a
Including
mic.
me.
Yeah, can grab a mic and a computer and then start a podcast and think they're funny and you know what I mean and just start talking shit and that kind of has expanded the field as well there of everybody's pretty much got a podcast now and trying to get more personal with the audience. Is there any comedian? Are there some comedians you can name that do a good job at appealing to the different generations, younger generation?
See, here's my issue right now. I'm now getting to the age where all I got is historical facts, and I don't know what the fuck's going on with the new kids today. So
Okay.
I'll be honest with you. I've been introduced a lot of younger comedians, mostly through the new kind of central specials that get released through their subscription base, as well as just being able to research people now a lot faster. So whenever I see people mention it on the Facebook timelines or anything like that, I go and check them out. But I have a really bad habit of just sticking to the things I already like. So I can't really name a lot of people, but there are a bunch of comedians that I've seen now that are on the come up. That a lot of their bits aren't, none of their bits are about like insulting different minority classes and stuff, or even then it's about their own experiences coming from a different diverse background. And I think that just makes comedy a lot bigger and a lot more wider. One of the things that I really kind of turned me off to comedy personally, and why I kind of got out of it, was it's tend towards a more right wing, nihilistic, libertarian type of humor and type of vibe. For example, I remember uh, it was Martin Luther King Day, and we're about to go on set, and there's this dude in the wheelchair, right? He's a white dude,
Mm.
and he's looking at me. We're joking around. We're on the green room. He's about to go on. And he goes, "Hey, Garrett, that's my government name. Hey, Garrett, I got this perfect bit, right? So, it's Martin Luther King Day, right? So I'm gonna have the black security guard get off me, like pick me up, and then I'm pretend to fall out my wheelchair, and I'm gonna lay down and be like, you see how they do my people? Completely racist, stereotypical shit,
Mm.
trying to do the whole, reverse racism, dumbass shit. So he was like, that would shock people, bro. That would get them going. And I was like, I just looked at him, just looked at him in his face. I was, hey man, if you really want to shock the audience, after your closing bit, you should stand up. And you see how you laughed at that? I didn't get no laughs. I got told that's fucked up. You shouldn't joke about that. The biggest group of comedians that are supposed to be like this iron skilled, take no prisoner type of humor. As soon as I make fun of a dude for trying to make a racial joke, I'm the bad guy, and that kind of turned me off from it, man.
Do you think there's a lot of sensitivity there, just in like people who
It's a
really?
boys' club. It's a
Okay.
boys' club. It's really like Chris Rock lets it out in the special. That's why I like that his interview was kind of in there. It's becoming a boys' club. They feel now that they've developed themselves so much in the mainstream culture that they can be the gatekeepers. That's why Adam Sandler makes him the sexiest dude in every fucking movie he is. We all know he was that nerdy Jewish kid at the table that got no play until like junior high when he played basketball that one week.
Mm. Yeah.
But they can lie to themselves now. They have the money, they have the influence, they have the access to media. So that's what you're seeing nowadays.
Yeah. Yeah. So you think there's just a lot of gatekeeping, boys' club kind of situation going on in comedy right now? Do you ever see it on the other end of the spectrum at all of people who kind of come in and really have no other material other than just maybe talking about their identity or maybe I guess I don't want to use this word, but kind of I guess SJW type stuff or anything like
Yeah,
that.
you always had them, man. They've been there since the coffee shops in the '70s, doing that weird yelling art, poems and shit. Like they've always. That's why I'm surprised the comedians that are like, oh my god, I don't know what's going on with this new generation. Do you not remember the coffee house where the girl with the pink hair would talk about death in a monotone voice while the dude hit the piano for 5 seconds before you do your bit? Like they were always there with us. Like the drag queens always perform next to us. The strippers sometimes after us. Like comedians have really developed this really squeaky clean image of themselves where they think they're better than these people that we came out of a tradition with. We were burlesque performers. Before the titties came out, we made you laugh and get drinks.
Do you think?
That's what the Lenny Bruce tradition was. Like he'd make a joke about lesbians going to town on each other, and then here come Lucy and she do a fucking fan dance for you for 2 hours.
Do you think it's just too much self importance?
Oh hell yeah! Oh hell yeah! Especially with the whole idea that they think that comedy is a modern lens. And honestly, I really was surprised from Seinfeld because I thought Seinfeld would embrace this kind of idea because he seems like the type of person. And he does mention his big ego about it in different interviews, but he actually pushes about against it. He says that no comedian has ever changed his mind politically or his opinions politically. Now he's been changed by his opinion about comedy and how the comedian performs because of how good their set is, but he has no real way to bend that way. And so I think that was an honest way to talk about comedy. Because, yeah, you can have a comedy set where it's about politics, it's about educating people, but at the end of the day, the importance is to laugh, and it's an entertainment thing. You're not going to now leave the stage and start organizing the waitress there to get, $17 minimum wage fucking hired.
Well, it's funny that he says that no comedian has ever changed him politically because now online you do have. It seems like the way to kind of get people, as they say, fall down the alt right pipeline is through comedy, so to speak, is through that way of a lot of these YouTubers or podcasters or things like that. It's under the guise of it's just jokes. It seems like that. So it seems like well, I guess maybe the jokes are a entryway point, and then as you start to fall more and more down, it is the ideology, it is the politics that gets more spread out. So I mean, what's kind of your opinion on that? That kind of.
I think when it comes to this stuff, it really comes down to Americans value entertainment more than they value actual political science, actual history, actual types of educational values, and it's not because there's their fault. It's because motherfuckers got to work 14-hour days. They got shifts up the ass. Got kids to raise. So when you want to turn your brain off, you don't want to read a 400-page book about deep historical knowledge. That you got to read 6 other books to even understand what the author's talking about. You want to watch the fucking Desperate Housewives. You want to watch some Real Housewives of Atlanta nonsense. And at the end of the day, that's where these people get their influence from. Is because it's easier for me to sit down and watch an hour set of Bill Burr or an hour set of God forbid even Steven Crowder, and get their comedy as well as their political insight and feel that I got all the necessary dose. Especially when you add the whole addition of what mainstream culture is now pushing of the comedians are the modern philosophers. You add that to it too, people feel justified in taking their political opinions from comedians. Don't get me wrong, some comedians are on the ball with their politics, but at the end of the day, that's kind of a self-discovery kind of thing rather than being pushed to by an entertainment, because then you just fall for propaganda, ain't you?
No. Um.
Even if it's the kind of propaganda I like, it's at the end of the day, if it's not self-research, you are falling for propaganda.
Yeah. Always good to do your own research. Always good to follow up things on yourself, and always good to form your own opinion on things, and come to your own conclusion with things, and have your own path. It's also good to I can see people give you the entryway into something to kind of inspire you, but it's always good to follow up on those things and challenge yourself and your thinking. Who is on your Mount Rushmore of
Oh
comedians?
shit! All right, so you got George Carlin, you got
Okay.
Richard Pryor. I always debate this because I feel like Lenny Bruce should always follow the three, but he should also kind of be the first. So I always put Lenny Bruce a little bit after the two. So Lenny Bruce, and I always forget the fourth one because that fourth one I always leave that spot for the newest and the greatest, kind of.
Okay.
I used to have John Mulaney there because of recent developments and his recent allegiance changes. I can't really put the man there anymore in that spot, but I always like to keep the new people around that fourth one.
Okay. Um, and with John Mulaney, is there any specials? What was the last comedy special you watched?
Oh shit! The last comedy special was the one before he went to rehab and started dating Olivia Munn. I don't know if the two are correlated, but they seem to happen to the same time. But that was the last one that I really enjoyed.
That was the last comedy special you enjoyed, period, or just with John Mulaney?
Just with John Mulaney. Again, a lot of my problems now. I'm starting to get into the age where I just want to watch all the shit that I remembered as a kid. So anytime I watch comedian specials, it's always either some old George Carlin, Richard Pryor, Dave Chappelle, Chris Rock. Chris Rock when he's I think it's I'm trying to remember his special name, but it's the one where he's wearing that really squeaky suit. That was one of my first specials that I ever saw on TV was with him in that special.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's a nice list. Of course, you got some classics prior, Carlin. I think
I
Carlin
mean,
and
I'm
Pryor.
also guilty of supporting Carlos Mencia in his early days, but I was a kid. I was 12. He was a grown man. I wasn't writing for him.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we all have our first bad ones. I was a big fan of Dane Cook when I was 12.
Oh man, all right, I let Dan Cook slide because like he was like innocent frat boy. Like Dan Cook could be popular now. He's so innocent in that sense.
Where's Dane? I haven't seen Dane Cook in years. I haven't seen it.
His brother fucked him up, bro.
Oh, okay. What happened with him and his brother?
Real quick, his brother was like he's either a manager or someone that was responsible for his money and
Ooh,
just completely robbed him blind.
ooh.
And then fucked with his career in terms of booking different things. It really turned into a bad blood situation between his brother. I think even his brother he think he even prosecuted his own brother and had to put him away.
Ooh, damn. Oh, jeez.
Yeah, it's that big of a issue. So that's why I kind of disappeared from the spotlight after a while.
Oh, yeah, that sucks. But yeah, back in the day, like it was like early 2000s, mid 2000s, used to see Dane Cook in everything, everywhere. I
It
mean,
also helped because he came out around the time YouTube was really getting popular and people like making those animated videos, specials.
oh yeah, that's how I got into him because he would be like his voice would be over like a Naruto video or something like that, and I would watch that or something. They would do the intercut his comedy over those things. Yeah, that's how I kind of got into him. Yeah, but yeah, he was in tons of stuff back then. But yeah, he just wow, I didn't know all that stuff about him and his brother. But so any final words on the documentary?
Honestly, I think if you guys are really interested in comedy history as well, specifically George Carlin and trying to get his life and trying to understand where he comes from and what helped him to form his comedy outlook, this is the perfect one to go check out. It's worth a good watch on HBO or any other means you can of getting your hands on it.
Yeah. So what rating would you give it?
Oh shit! What is your rating system?
So our rating system. So you haven't been here in a while. We changed a couple things.
Out to stars, pineapples.
So we do tune in is our highest rating right now. We may go to a higher rating. I'm trying to discuss that with Nick and everything like that and Dusk. But we may do kind of so right now. The highest rating we have is tune in. If we feel very very strongly about something, we say like strong tune in or high tune in. Then there's tune out. Of course, that just means you didn't like it. There's stream it, which is kind of like our rental. There's a skip it. Many more dislike towards it. Then we have a waste of fucking film. That's like really hate it. So that's our rating system there. Tune in,
Okay.
tune out, skip it, stream it, waste of fucking film.
Honestly, I'm gonna give it a fucking tune in. You got to check this shit out, especially if you're a huge comedy fan.
Yeah, I would say the same. I think this documentary does a good job at delving into the life of George Carlin. It being two parts, and these are full two part, kind of specials here because each are like an hour and 50 minutes. So you'll get a lot of information about his personal life, about his marriage, about his family, about his rise in comedy, about his constantly ever evolving nature as a comedian throughout the years. His career spans 5 decades. It's also nice to have people come in with these different interviews and talk about him. Like Alex Winter gave a good interview because he was in you talk about his movie career, like George Carlin. Maybe some people, I guess, maybe around our age would know George Carlin from Bill and Ted, and Alex wanted to talk about that and talked about.
Definitely the Kevin Smith films.
Yeah, and Kevin Smith also was interviewed as well. Kevin Smith also detailed him as well, and as well about his experience working with George Carlin, and so that was kind of also very nice to see to get more insight on the real person, not just the person on the stage. But it's also great stuff as well as him on the stage and doing the specials and really giving good bits there that are also really remarkable. And he was still sharp. I mean, all the way up until even his older age, still really sharp. And how he felt about the world. I mean, you know what I mean. And like the Larry King interview when he says he just has such a disdain for humanity, and what I mean, and everything like that. And his daughter, remarked of like, if you have this view, why are you even going up stage? Why do you even think it's worth it? But I don't want to talk about every little element of the special. You have people who want to check it out and want to see it, but I think it's a very good special. And if you like Ganja said, great in the history of comedy to really explore those things. So that was, and I give it a strong tune in. For that movie as well. Thank you, Ganja, for coming on.
No problem, sir.
One more time, if you want to give people a rundown just of your links, and your social medias, where people can find you, promote your stuff, everything like that.
Well, like I said, you can always check me out on the Chat Tech almost every day of the week over on Twitch as well as Facebook and other means of streaming that we can come up with in order to get some good views coming our way. As well as you can check me out on Monty Podcast and a bunch of other upcoming projects that are honestly development hell at the moment. But besides that, you can go check me out on my Twitter at RegGanjaguru. That's where I post a lot of stuff about my political activism as well as just opinions, jokes, and all kinds of other shit if you want.
Nice. Thank you so much for coming on with me, man.
No problem, sir.
All right. Take care, Ganja.
Take care.